Hey everybody, happy Independence Day. Happy 4th of July. I am going to talk about Chinese investment and involvement in Latin America. So, I know you're all super excited. You want to listen. You want to learn. So, buckle up, Buttercup. Anyway, this is a good episode. Take a listen. All right, so let's talk about the growing role of Chinese finance in Latin America. So, at beltonroad.news, you can find all kinds of articles about the progression of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, which, if you don't know what that is, please check back at one of my previous podcasts. It's a major infrastructure project, a series of infrastructure projects meant to kind of mimic the old Silk Road. Very complex, has to do with building new logistics networks, ports, bridges, railroads for China, all across the world. One of the big themes about this is that China provides funding and building for other countries that need infrastructure done. So let's get to this article. It says the growing role of Chinese finance in Latin America. The spread of Chinese commercial banks in Latin America follows the increasing presence of Chinese state-owned and private enterprises, creating intricate financial ties that are independent of political ideology that will only grow with the expansion of the Belt and Road Initiative to the region. So I've mentioned this before. Basically, a big thing about the way that the Chinese are enacting this is kind of like this is a foreign policy. It's a form of foreign policy. Is they stress that they are not politically or ideologically tied to what they're doing. Basically, they are all about economics. They're all about money. So if they can go into a country, and there's reasons for that. One reason is because they need to keep their economic engine booming. Right? They need to keep their factories churning out products, whether it be metal, cement, whatever it is that they're making, they need to keep making those things. So it behooves them to go into countries, offer financing, and then have those countries use that financing to hire Chinese companies in the area. So, but it's purely economic, or that's how it appears. As the nature of Chinese investment in Latin America evolves, so too do the dynamics of financial services required to support it. According to research by the think tank Inter-American Dialogue in Boston University, China's development loans to Latin America totaled $7.7 billion in 2018, and it's been way down from $21 billion in 2015 and the high of $35 billion in 2010. Once again, that's $21 billion in 2015. $35 billion in 2010. Basically, they're investing, it looks like maybe billions a year into the area. The expansion of China's $100 billion Belt and Road Initiative infrastructure program to Latin America and the Caribbean has 19 regional countries are now signees, has increased engagement with new nations. Chinese finance was once focused on providing the lump sums required for leftist governments to build oil and mining projects needed to fuel China's booming consumption. Today, new investment in transport, telecommunications, and renewable require greater post-construction engagement, deeper, more sustained financial relationships. So it says in 2015, the government announced its intention to double its bilateral trade with Latin America to $500 billion annually by 2025. And it says that the Chinese state-owned enterprises are becoming leading investors in the region's biggest greenfield projects, deepening financial ties. So this is, I think that it's significant for a few reasons. Or let's just, maybe it's one reason, maybe it's a few. Well, we're about to find out. So some implications here is, one, China has clearly expanded their influence to other parts of the world. So previously I focused on a lot of BRI projects you mainly hear about them around the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Europe, and Africa. Actually, a lot in Africa too. But now, it's been going on in Latin America, but now that I'm looking a little bit more into it, it seems that this is a bigger push. So this is really significant, I think, for the United States as a whole, or at least, for U.S. foreign policy, because we have an adversary that is basically becoming heavily invested with some of our bigger trading areas of the world, like we heavily trade with Latin America. And it could be a geostrategic problem. I don't think it has to be one, but it is one where if China builds out critical infrastructure and things like that, then maybe they're able to how about this? It could be narrowed down to this. The more investment and leverage China has over certain countries, economically, the more political sway they will also most likely have. Not a guarantee, but highly likely, right? And I have my running hypothesis is that we're going to start seeing more of a splintering of the world order because of Chinese investment. Basically, even though China represents a threat in certain aspects to a lot of countries are also utilizing Chinese funding. And because the Chinese government does stress that it's purely economic, they don't care about ideology, it's appetizing for a lot of countries to get involved. And the more other countries get involved with Chinese financed projects and things like that, I think it's just going to be harder for the United States to pull the world order, right? That's why I think it's being fractured. And I don't think it's being fractured into pro-China and, anti-China or pro-America, China and America, because I think a lot of countries are going to be conflicted, right? We have lots of allies that are it's going to be conflicted. It's going to create a situation to me, here's what it looks like. It looks like it's creating a situation where countries are just going to be reluctant to do things, right? Whether it be take action against another country, whether it be China, or to do something in the UN. That's just how it looks to me. And going into Latin America, getting very close to the United States, obviously, this represents a potential issue down south of the border as well. So, going to take a break here, then we're going to look at some of this more in detail with another article. Hey everybody, this ad is about a podcast called A Little About a Lot podcast. I have not seen it, so take it at your own risk. A Little About a Lot is a variety show by YouTubers, Kelsey and Becky behind the channel The Sorry Girls. Kelsey and Becky spill tea about their personal lives, talk about the struggles of relationships and dating. Becky is married and Kelsey is not. Oh my. Research their favorite celebs from the 90s, answer audience questions, interview some badass people, and more. We want to challenge perspectives and leave our audience feeling refreshed, inspired, and with a little more knowledge about a lot. Search your podcast app for A Little About a Lot podcast and subscribe to the A Little About a Lot podcast. And that is it for this. So there's an article in a place called dialogochino.net. And, at least the article is pretty well written. It's from April of this year. It says, Belt and Road, the new face of China in Latin America. The second BRI forum takes place in Beijing, blah, blah, blah. So it says, in just a decade, trade between China and Latin America has multiplied more than 20 times as regional partners have signed hundreds of agreements and broken ground on dozens of key energy, transport, and infrastructure projects. Okay, so, like I said, this just backs up what I'm talking about, a large increase in investment from China into the Latin American region. The rapid commercial expansion means China now sees Latin America as a natural extension of its Belt and Road connectivity, which originally encompassed Europe and Asia when launched in 2013, but which 18 countries in the region have now endorsed. So, here are some of the countries that have endorsed the Chinese BRI. Antigua, Barbuda, Barbados, Bolivia, Chile, Costa Rica, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guyana, Jamaica, Panama, Trinidad and Tobago, Venezuela, and Uruguay. So that's, it's a significant list. In the article, it goes on to say that Brazil and Argentina have not signed on to BRI projects, but they do have a working relationship with China in the form of other agreements. So here's some interesting stuff here. It says, unlike the U.S., China is the actor that today embodies globalization and free trade. Its main objective is global economic integration, and that is why everyone is invited to participate, said Defrain Esteso, a researcher at the Latin American Center for the Political and Economic Study of China. BRI claims to offer a global network of infrastructure projects in Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Americas, mainly to facilitate trade whilst being the promise of Chinese investment and economic development for partner nations. So basically, this is interesting too because, this is, I get it, this guy works for a think tank, or he's a researcher, so it's, who cares about his opinion about this per se. But unlike the U.S., China is the actor that today embodies globalization and free trade. I don't necessarily disagree completely because if we look at some of the things that we do with sanctions, which I'm not necessarily against sanctions, but, we do wield, when it comes to the U.S. dollar and our financial ties and the financial system being highly integrated with the U.S., we have a lot of leverage. We have a lot of leverage over a lot of countries. I mean, we can stop trade with many countries around the world. We can cause a lot of problems for a lot of people. It gives us a lot of leverage to do things. But it just, that's not free trade, right? Now, that being said, the United States does trade liberally with its partners. So, and I wouldn't necessarily say that China embodies globalization and free trade. I disagree with that. I don't think that's I don't think that they displace the United States as the major actors of globalization and free trade today. I think that's kind of bogus. But I do think that they are heavily moving in a strong economic position. Like I said, they do need to feed themselves, and also it gives them leverage. So there's a lot of things going on here. It continues. In the last 5 years, BRI has expanded its scope and now includes several regions, including Latin America. Panama was the first country in the region to sign a cooperation agreement under the BRI banner after establishing diplomatic relations with China in 2017. Now, I don't know if anyone remembers this, but several years ago, back when I was in high school, there was talk of China building a new canal near Panama, or, not in Panama, I don't think, but near. And I remember everyone, that was considered a big geopolitical threat, which, maybe it is. So, however, challenges for China's foreign policy in Latin America remain. The largest economies, Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico, have not yet signed any BRI agreements, which Chinese government will find annoying, according to Barrios. Chile is the only one of the biggest economies that has signed. The reason, he added, is that the U.S. has discouraged Latin American countries from cooperating closely with China, claiming it's not transparent about its loans and saddles recipients with unmanageable debt. It was one thing when it was limited to Europe and Asia. Now that it includes Latin America, it's different, Barrios said about U.S. concerns over BRI. So, why are these guys doing this? Why are some of these countries accepting it? A lot of this is the same thing across the board. Most countries are accepting BRI investments because they need infrastructure. They need infrastructure. They need new bridges. They need new roads. They need new factories. And the Chinese are willing to do it. A lot of people have pointed out that it's possible that China's saddling them with debt. Like I said, I think this is just one of multiple possible strategic points. Right? I don't think that the Chinese, I think you'd have to be a fool to say this is purely a debt trap. I don't think it's purely that. I actually think China would rather get paid. But like I said, there's a few things going on here. One, what happens is while the projects are going on, they feed Chinese economic growth. Two, they also help increase China's political sway across the world. Right? Three, they provide a situation where China cannot be cut off from one particular area of the world so easily. That's important for China. At least from what I've done my research on China so far, the historical way of, a historical way of thinking about things is being surrounded, and they don't want to be surrounded like they have been for the last century. So basically, spreading out all over the world is a good way to make sure you have logistical frameworks that can support your country from every point in the globe. Now, do I think that now here's some speculation about the future. I do think that China will continue to be more integrated in South America. I think regardless of what the United States issues, the warnings, whatever, I just, I think China's going to continue to push. It says that they already have agreements with a lot of the big countries. They're just not BRI agreements. So, we'll see how that transforms into the future. And we'll also see how this affects the economic world order. So that's all I have to say on Chinese news today. And thank you, and happy 4th of July.